Our daughter's been taken and nothing's ever going to be as bad as that. It's still been difficult, it's been emotive.
I think the highlight's really just been the team working together. Obviously it's been quite tough. There's been a lot of miles and a lot of climbing, and there's obviously highs and lows and that, and the fact that we've all worked together so well. And I think we all know why we're here. We know it's for such a good cause, and that just keeps you going. Yeah, I know this won't help Madeleine.
The night of May 3rd, 2007, in the quiet resort town of Praia da Luz, Portugal, remains one of the most haunting nights in modern true crime history. A little girl, 3-year-old Madeleine McCann, vanished from her family's holiday apartment without a trace. The search that followed would become one of the most extensive and controversial missing child investigations the world has ever seen. Yet, despite the headlines, the appeals, and the countless theories, the truth remains hidden in silence. In the hours that followed Madeleine's disappearance, the world saw 2 grieving parents, Kate and Jerry McCann, both doctors, both visibly broken by the unimaginable loss of their daughter. Cameras captured their tears, their pleas for help, their determination to never give up hope. On the surface, their story was that of devastated parents searching desperately for their child. But beneath the surface, within the shadows of their words and actions, certain details did not align. One of those details was a morning walk, an unreported 2-hour window between 5 and 7 a.m. on May 4th, the morning after Madeleine vanished. According to witnesses, the couple quietly left their apartment while the village was still dark and silent. They knocked on a friend's door, asking her to watch over the twins while they went out. Where did they go? Why was this walk never mentioned in their original police statements in 2007? And why did Kate, years later in her memoir, describe opening a large trash bin and whispering, "Please God, don't let her be in here"? These questions cut deeper than the initial tragedy itself. Because in cases like these, what is left unsaid often speaks louder than what is told. The omissions, the silences, the details that surface years later in books or carefully crafted interviews. These are the cracks through which suspicion seeps in. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann has never been about one single theory. It has always been a mosaic of possibilities. Abduction, accident, concealment, or something more complex. And yet, some of the most chilling possibilities emerge not from wild speculation, but from the McCanns' own words and actions. When Kate admitted to opening a dumpster in fear of finding her daughter discarded like waste, she revealed a moment of raw humanity. But she also revealed a detail that would fuel one of the darkest theories of all, that Madeleine's body may have been placed in a bin, collected by municipal waste, and forever lost in the labyrinth of a landfill. This introduction is not meant to accuse, but to unravel, to lay bare the haunting silences, the timelines unaccounted for, the leads buried for years. It is to follow the threads of omission, to ask why crucial details were withheld, and to confront the possibility that what happened to Madeleine McCann may never be fully recovered, not because the evidence does not exist, but because it was deliberately allowed to slip away. As we journey through this story, we will revisit those missing hours, those buried composites, and those decisions that shaped not only the investigation, but the narrative itself. We will stand in the darkness of Praia da Luz in those hours before dawn and ask the same question the world has been asking for nearly 2 decades. What really happened to Madeleine McCann? The morning after Madeleine vanished, Praia da Luz remained cloaked in darkness. The narrow streets, normally alive with the hum of vacationers and locals preparing for the day, were silent. It was during these hours, between 5 and 7 a.m., that Kate and Jerry McCann made a decision that has puzzled investigators ever since. Instead of staying in their apartment, waiting for the police or comforting their twins, the couple slipped quietly out into the night. According to later testimony, Kate knocked on the door of her friend Fiona Payne, one of the so-called Tepa 7. She asked Fiona and her husband to watch over the twins while she and Jerry went out. The reason, Kate explained, was that they couldn't bear the helplessness of doing nothing. They wanted to search for Madeleine themselves. On the surface, this sounds like the desperate act of grieving parents. But what raises questions is not simply the act. It is the silence that followed. When Kate and Jerry gave their official statements to the Portuguese police in 2007, they did not mention this early morning walk, not once. For investigators, this was not a small omission. It was a gaping hole in the timeline. Why would two parents supposedly frantic in their search choose not to report one of the most critical moments of their efforts? Another piece of the puzzle came from a Portuguese witness, Paulo Jorge Fernandes Nedato, who reported seeing the McCanns walking alone on the streets around 7 a.m. They were without police escorts, without friends, without cameras, just the two of them moving through the village in silence. This independent sighting confirmed that their absence was not brief. They had left their apartment at 5 a.m., and 2 hours later, they were still out. What were they doing during this window? The answer has never been fully explained. The streets of Praia da Luz at that time would have been eerily quiet. Most tourists were asleep. Local workers had not yet begun their day. The absence of activity meant that Kate and Jerry had freedom of movement, unobserved and unchecked. Around the Ocean Club Resort and scattered across the small village, large green dumpsters stood waiting. On maps from 2007, several are marked clearly near apartment 5A and close to the Tapas restaurant. Their placement was discreet, accessible, and, in some cases, tucked away along back paths where no one would notice a passerby in the dark. It was later, in her 2011 memoir, that Kate admitted she had opened one of these bins that morning. "Please God, don't let her be in here," she recalled, whispering. That sentence struck the world as a mother's worst fear. But for investigators, it raised another question. If she truly did this, what else might have happened during those missing 2 hours? To this day, the early morning walk remains one of the most heavily scrutinized moments in the case. Forensic experts have noted that it would have been the ideal time for anyone to act unseen. No witnesses, no cameras, no interruptions. Just a stretch of time in which a decision could be made and executed. Whether Kate and Jerry were simply walking in grief, or whether their silence conceals something more, is the shadow that still hangs over those 2 hours. 2 hours. That is all it was. And yet, in those hours, entire theories have been born. About dumpsters, about disposal, about why a timeline so critical to understanding Madeleine's fate was left unspoken for years. It is one of the most chilling lines in Kate McCann's 2011 memoir. Simple, short, almost whispered between the sentences. I remember opening a big dumpster-type bin and saying to myself, "Please God, don't let her be in here." At first glance, the line reads like the raw cry of a mother drowning in despair. And perhaps that is exactly what it was. A fleeting moment of terror as she searched for her daughter in places no parent should ever have to look. But the words also opened the door to one of the most unsettling theories in the Madeleine McCann case. That her body may have been disposed of in a dumpster and carried away, forever hidden in the machinery of a waste disposal system. The weight of the sentence lies in its unspoken implications. If Kate truly opened a bin and feared finding Madeleine inside, it means that she and Jerry physically checked dumpsters during those early morning hours. It means they walked the quiet streets of Praia da Luz with a purpose, to look into places where the unimaginable might be concealed. And yet, none of this was mentioned in their original police statements. The world only learned of it 4 years later, in the carefully constructed pages of a book. Why does that matter? Because in missing child investigations, transparency is everything. Every action, every movement, every thought, no matter how small, is usually shared with investigators immediately. Yet here was a deeply significant detail, withheld at the time and later revealed not in testimony, but in a memoir. For critics, this omission raised the possibility that Kate's description was not only emotional, but also strategic, a way to insert a humanizing detail into the narrative while controlling how and when it was released. But beyond the questions of timing and omission lies something darker: the theory itself. Praia da Luz in 2007 was a small but functioning village with a municipal waste system. Around the Ocean Club Resort, multiple large bins were placed strategically along back streets, near restaurants, and close to the apartments. These bins were emptied regularly, their contents compacted and transported to a regional landfill. For investigators, the chilling thought was that if Madeleine's body had been hidden in one of those bins during the early hours of May 4th, it could have been collected, transported, and buried beneath tons of refuse within days. Forever lost. That possibility is not just a product of speculation. Forensic experts have explained that landfills are virtually impossible to search after a certain time has passed. Waste is compacted under enormous pressure. Organic material decomposes rapidly. Cotton pajamas, like the pink ones Madeleine was last seen wearing, would disintegrate quickly under such conditions. Even bones, over time, can fracture and vanish into the chaos of landfill strata. In this context, Kate's whispered plea, "Please God, don't let her be in here," becomes more than a line in a book. It becomes a window into the silent horror of that morning. It forces us to ask, did she fear what she might find, or did she fear what someone else might have already done? The truth is that no one knows what happened during those 2 hours. The bins were not searched immediately. By the time investigators checked them days later, many had already been emptied. If anything was placed inside on May 1st, it would have been gone long before the police arrived. And so, the image lingers. A mother in the half-light of dawn, opening a bin and whispering to herself. An image that is at once unbearably human and profoundly haunting. To understand why Kate McCann's memory of opening a dumpster is so disturbing, we must look at what would have happened if Madeleine's body had, in fact, been placed inside one. The municipal waste system in Praia da Luz functioned with relentless efficiency. Bins were emptied regularly, their contents compacted into garbage trucks, and transported to the regional waste facility. Within days, everything from those village dumpsters, food scraps, discarded bottles, bags of refuse, would end up buried in the sprawling Barlavento landfill north of Praia da Luz. This is where the theory grows darker. Investigators discovered that the section of the landfill in use during May 2007 was known as Cell C. Public records show that it was active between 2006 and 2010, aligning perfectly with the timeline of Madeleine's disappearance. Waste collected from Luz and its surrounding areas was deposited directly into this site. 4 years later, in 2011, after complaints from local residents about the smell, Cell C was sealed with plastic sheeting and buried beneath newer layers of refuse. Today, the area sits entombed, meters below the surface, its contents compressed under years of additional waste and earth. The logistics of searching such a site are staggering. Excavating Cell C would require heavy machinery, specialized forensic teams, government permits, and millions in funding. Even then, there would be no guarantee of success. Landfill waste is not like layers of sediment. It shifts, compresses, and crushes everything within it. Soft tissue disintegrates rapidly. Cotton fabric, like the pink pajamas Madeleine wore, would biodegrade within months. Even bone can be fractured and pulverized under the immense pressure. Experts explain that after years underground, the chances of recovering identifiable remains are vanishingly small. This is not speculation. In 2015, investigators in Portugal found partial remains of a newborn at the Seixal landfill. The discovery was grim proof that bodies can be discarded into waste systems and vanish almost completely. Despite forensic efforts, little could be recovered from that case, highlighting the devastating truth. Modern landfills can swallow human remains forever. Placed against this backdrop, Kate's memoir line about opening a dumpster acquires a devastating weight. If Madeleine's body had indeed been hidden in a bin and collected before police searched the area, she may have been transported into Cell C, never to be found again. That possibility would explain many things. The lack of physical evidence in apartment 5A, the absence of forensic traces pointing to an abductor, the failure to locate any remains despite international searches. For the Portuguese police, the delay in searching the bins was a crucial failure. They did not inspect them until May 7th, 4 days after the disappearance. By then, the municipal collection cycle had already swept through. The bins had been emptied, their contents compressed into trucks, their destination already sealed beneath tons of garbage. Any opportunity to recover evidence in that crucial early window was lost. And so, the landfill theory remains one of the most haunting possibilities in this case. Not because it can be proven, it cannot, but because it explains too much with one terrible answer. It accounts for the secrecy of the early morning walk, the silence in the official statements, the fleeting but loaded detail in Kate's book. It is a theory that offers no closure, no grave, no chance of recovery. Only the silence of waste buried under earth. An anonymous resting place for stories that were never meant to be told. If this is where Madeleine's story ended, then it ended in the most invisible way possible. Not in the arms of an abductor, not in a dramatic discovery, but in a sealed grave of garbage where truth itself is compacted and forgotten. On the night of May 3rd, 2007, just after 10 p.m., an Irish family was walking back to their holiday apartment in Praia da Luz. Martin Smith, along with his wife and 2 of their children, noticed a man walking quickly down Rua da Escola Primaria. In his arms, he carried a young blonde girl dressed in light-colored pajamas. Her limbs hung limp against his shoulder, her head tilted heavily, as though asleep or unconscious. At first, it seemed like an unremarkable image, a father carrying his child late at night. But in hindsight, this fleeting encounter would become one of the most important and most troubling pieces of the Madeleine McCann case. The Smith family gave their statements to the Portuguese police. They described the man as Caucasian, between 1.75 and 180 meters tall, in his late 30s to early 40s, with short brown hair and an average athletic build. His trousers were beige, made from thick fabric, with possible buttons down the side. He moved with purpose, avoiding eye contact, saying nothing. The Smiths could not identify him at the time, but they were clear about what they had seen: a man carrying a child who matched Madeleine's description, in the exact window of time when she is believed to have disappeared. Months later, back in Ireland, Martin Smith watched a news broadcast. He saw Jerry McCann stepping off a plane, carrying one of his twins in his arms. The way Jerry held his child on the left shoulder, with the same posture, the same stride, hit him with sudden recognition. Martin later told police he was 60 to 80% certain that the man he had seen in Praia da Luz was Jerry McCann. This was not a casual comment. It was the testimony of a calm, credible witness with no ties to the McCanns. No reason to invent such a claim. His family members backed up his account. For investigators, this should have been a seismic revelation. An independent witness had placed Jerry outside the apartment at the exact time of Madeleine's disappearance. And yet, this testimony was quietly buried. In 2008, the McCanns hired a private detective agency, Oakley International, funded by donations to the Find Madeleine Fund. Among the evidence reviewed was the Smith family's account. Oakley International even commissioned an e-fit composite sketch based on Martin Smith's description. The result was startling. The man in the sketch bore an undeniable resemblance to Jerry McCann himself. But instead of releasing the sketch to the public, the McCann's legal team allegedly threatened Oakley International with legal action. The report was shelved, the e-fits locked away, and for 5 years, the public never saw them. It wasn't until October 2013, during a BBC Crime Watch broadcast led by Scotland Yard's Operation Grange, that the sketches finally surfaced. By then, the delay had raised more questions than answers. Why had these images, potentially the most crucial lead in the case, been kept hidden for so long? Why weren't they displayed on the official Find Madeleine website, alongside other less significant sketches? When the e-fits finally appeared, viewers immediately noticed the resemblance to Jerry. Online discussions exploded. Critics accused the McCanns of suppressing evidence. Supporters insisted it was a coincidence. But the damage was done. For many, the long delay looked less like an oversight and more like deliberate narrative control. The resemblance was not superficial. The man's height matched Jerry's exactly, 1.75 to 180 meters. The age, late 30s, fit perfectly, as Jerry was 39 at the time. The build was average, athletic, slightly lean, just like him. Even the beige trousers, thick with side buttons, appeared in photographs of Jerry that same summer. This combination of witness testimony, visual evidence, and delayed disclosure turned the Smithman sighting into one of the most controversial elements of the case. Whether or not Jerry McCann was the man the Smiths saw, the suppression of the e-fits remains deeply troubling. For investigators, transparency is vital. Leads must be followed, witnesses protected, and evidence released. When a family suppresses a sketch that resembles them, it inevitably raises questions, not just about guilt, but about motive, fear, and control. The Smithman sighting remains the only independent, credible account of a man carrying a child on the night Madeleine disappeared. And yet, instead of being amplified, it was buried. For years, it sat in silence, waiting for the world to notice. When a child disappears, the instinct of most parents is to open every door, shout every detail, and share every possible clue with investigators. Transparency becomes a weapon. Yet, in the case of Madeleine McCann, observers noticed something different. Over time, the flow of information from Kate and Jerry was not open. It was controlled. Carefully timed statements, delayed disclosures, and selective revelations began to shape the narrative. By late 2007, the McCanns had already faced harsh scrutiny from the Portuguese police. Tensions grew as inconsistencies appeared in their statements. But rather than simply cooperating and allowing investigators to lead, the McCanns took another step. They hired Bell Pottinger, one of the most powerful public relations firms in the United Kingdom. Bell Pottinger specialized in crisis management and shaping public opinion during scandals. Their job was not to solve crimes. Their job was to protect reputations. From that point forward, the McCanns' story unfolded not only in courtrooms and police stations, but also in the theater of media. Press conferences were polished, interviews were carefully worded. Websites and public appeals were designed not just to search for a missing child, but to maintain the image of grieving parents under siege. The official Find Madeleine website amplified certain leads while quietly ignoring others. Sketches and witness reports that supported the abduction narrative were displayed. But the Smithman e-fits, which bore an uncomfortable resemblance to Jerry, were conspicuously absent until 2015, 7 years after they were created. This selective visibility was not accidental, it was strategy. In Portugal, journalists questioned why certain details, like the 5 a.m. walk or the omission of key witness sightings, had never been revealed in the earliest days. Why did these details appear only later, in books or curated media interviews, long after their investigative value had waned? To many, it looked like narrative management, releasing information on their terms when it could be framed sympathetically rather than when it could be most useful to investigators. The British press played its part. Back home, Kate and Jerry were often portrayed as victims of a flawed Portuguese investigation, as parents wronged by incompetence. Headlines focused on their suffering, their resilience, their campaign for answers. Yet in Portugal, the tone was starkly different. Local journalists pointed to contradictions, unverified timelines, and the lack of transparency. The gap between the two narratives widened, creating a cultural rift in how the case was perceived. And then there were the lawsuits. The McCanns pursued or threatened legal action against several Portuguese journalists and even former police officials, including Gonçalo Amaral, whose book suggested a cover-up. Each lawsuit further emphasized the impression of control, protecting not just the search for Madeleine, but the family's public image. Critics argued that every courtroom battle consumed resources that could have been used to follow leads. Supporters claimed the lawsuits were necessary to defend against defamation. Either way, the spotlight shifted again, not to Madeleine's whereabouts, but to the image of her parents. For many observers, this dynamic became one of the most troubling aspects of the case. Instead of full cooperation, there seemed to be calculated silence. Instead of every lead pursued, some were buried. Instead of truth at any cost, there was reputation at any cost. The early morning walk, the bins, the Smithman sighting, all emerged not in urgent testimony, but in controlled, delayed disclosures. And therein lies the uncomfortable truth. In cases like this, narrative is power. The McCanns understood that. The press amplified it, and the world consumed it. Whether this strategy was born out of guilt, fear, or pure desperation to control chaos, it reshaped the investigation. It blurred the line between parents seeking justice and public figures managing a scandal. The result was a story no longer just about a missing girl. It became a story about perception, about what was shown, what was hidden, and what was carefully crafted to be remembered. Nearly 2 decades have passed since that night in Praia da Luz, and yet Madeleine McCann's disappearance remains one of the most baffling mysteries of modern times. No remains, no confirmed sightings, no definitive evidence, only fragments of testimony, scattered timelines, and silences that continue to echo louder than words. From the beginning, investigators stressed that the hours immediately following a disappearance are critical. Clues are fresh, witnesses alert, evidence intact. Yet in this case, the earliest hours were marked not by clarity, but by omission. Between 5 and 7 a.m. on May 4th, Kate and Jerry left their apartment without police, without explanation, only to later reveal fragments of what they did in memoirs years down the line. Why was this crucial period hidden? Witnesses saw them walking the streets. Kate herself admitted she opened dumpsters in fear of finding her daughter inside. And yet, none of this appeared in their original statements. By the time investigators checked the bins, days had already passed, their contents hauled away to the Barlavento landfill, possibly burying answers forever. The theory that Madeleine's body could have been disposed of in this way is not just chilling, it is tragically plausible. Then came the Smithman sighting. A credible, independent family described a man carrying a blonde child in pajamas at the exact window of her disappearance. Their testimony matched Jerry McCann's height, build, clothing, even his way of carrying a child. The effits created from their descriptions bore his likeness unmistakably. Yet, for 5 years, these images were suppressed, hidden from public view, only to emerge later under Scotland Yard's Operation Grange. Why weren't they part of the earliest appeals? Why weren't they posted on the official Find Madeleine website until 2015? Layered on top of these gaps was a sophisticated media strategy. Bell Pottinger, a PR firm skilled in reputation management, shaped the narrative. Press statements were polished, lawsuits silenced critics, and disclosures came not when they mattered most, but when they could be controlled. Each choice, whether to delay a map, to omit a timeline, or to bury a sketch, added another layer of suspicion. Was this the instinct of grieving parents trying to survive the glare of the media? Or was it something more, an effort to steer the story away from uncomfortable truths? The tragedy of this case is not just the disappearance of a child, it is the disappearance of certainty. Every unanswered question, every silence, every delayed revelation widened the gap between what we know and what we can prove. Did Madeleine die in an accident inside apartment 5A, her death concealed out of fear? Was she abducted by a stranger who slipped into the shadows? Or was she lost forever in the machinery of a landfill, erased by time and waste? The truth may lie buried beneath years of narrative control, sealed beneath the weight of legal battles and media campaigns. It may rest in Cell C of the Barlavento landfill, an anonymous grave among discarded things. Or it may linger in the unspoken words of those who know more than they ever revealed. And yet, even in the absence of proof, the case continues to haunt. Because at the heart of it all is a child, a little girl in pink pajamas who should have grown up but never did. Her story has become a mirror, reflecting not just the failings of an investigation, but the human instinct to conceal, to protect, to reshape truth when it feels unbearable. The shadow of doubt still stretches across Praia da Luz, across every headline, every documentary, every whispered theory. It asks us to consider not only what was done, but what was left undone. And in that silence, in that dark space between fact and omission, Madeleine McCann's fate remains an unanswered question, one that time alone may never solve.